Thank you. Well, um, at first, when I was thinking about what I would talk about, when we realized that we needed somebody to speak, I thought, well, I'll talk about meditation because I do a meditation here every week. And then I thought to myself, but am I qualified? I mean, we had John Sealander here. He's been meditating for like 30 years and he's a Buddhist. And shouldn't he be able to talk about meditation? And maybe I won't make it so interesting. And then I went down that crazy train of thought, that spirals around. And then I came back to Mickey Singer's suggestion of being the watcher of the voice in my head and learning to create space between that voice and who I am. And I realized, maybe I'll talk about the voice. We all have that voice. Um, so when I first read The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, I felt a little annoyed when he was like in college and only realizing, oh, I have a voice in my head. And I thought to myself, well, doesn't everybody have a voice in their head? And he just realized that when he was like 22. I mean, how crazy is that? But then one time when we were at his temple, we were having a discussion after one of his talks, and somebody raised their hand and said, but I don't have a voice in my head. And I was like, what? I was absolutely shocked. I was like, how can you not have a voice in your head? I mean, I have a voice. Aiden told me he has a voice. My kids tell me they have a voice. Like, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. So I Googled it because, that's what you do when you're like, I don't know. And I found some research on the topic. There was a man named Russell Herbert, and this was actually done in 1990. So it's not that old. And he was a psychologist at the University of Nevada, and he was interested in the inner voice. And he decided that there was several different kinds of your inner voice. It could be an inner monologue or an inner dialogue. And he just wanted to study people's inner voice. So he asked people to wear a beeper, and they walked around all day with the beeper, and the beeper would go off and they'd have a little notebook and they'd have to write down like their thoughts, what they were thinking about right before the beeper went off. And then they would later talk to a researcher, and the researcher would say, well, what were you thinking of? And if they said, well, I was thinking I need to buy bread. The researcher said, but were you actually thinking the words, I need to buy bread? Or did you see bread? Or were you just feeling hungry? Or was it a sensation? And after a while, they got better at describing what their thoughts were. And they realized that this revealed that some people do have an inner voice, like a monologue, like a radio in your head, where there's like always a conversation going on or a monologue going on. But others don't really have a speech, which I thought was interesting. Instead, they experience images or sensations or emotions, but not a voice and a words, which is my experience. So of course you have your own experience and you think everybody's like that. So I just thought that was so interesting. And he also, in his research, suggested that children start having the inner voice around 6, 7, 8 years old. And when I read that, I'm reading a book right now, and the book is a memoir of a woman named Jeanette McCurdy, who's a child actress, and she was a Mormon. And she, in this book, right at the point that I'm at when I was just writing this speech, she's 8 years old, and at 8 years old, you are baptized in the Mormon faith. Before anything you did at 8 years old doesn't matter. You can do whatever, and it's not considered against you. Once you're 8 years old, it's considered the age of accountability. That's when you know better. And so you get baptized and then you're confirmed right away. And when you're confirmed, you're given the gift of the Holy Ghost. And that gift is the Mormon regard the Holy Ghost as a spiritual compass, something that will guide them through life. And so Jeanette in her book was talking about being given the gift of the Holy Ghost. And she thought that meant that the Holy Ghost would literally talk to her. It would speak to her. And so after she turned 8, she was baptized. She was, in the church, and she was waiting. She'd walk around and she'd be like, well, when's the Holy Ghost going to talk to me? And so at first it didn't, she was 8. So at first she didn't hear anything. And she was like, oh, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Like maybe I, shouldn't be a Mormon. Maybe I'm bad. And then one time when she was at an audition and the Holy Ghost talked to her, and she was like, oh, the Holy Ghost talked to me. But what the Holy Ghost told her to do was go take your name off that audition list, go to the bathroom, turn around 3 times, lock the door, come back, put your name back on the list, sit down, and then you'll get the part. And so she's like, oh, so she did all those things and she got the part. But that sounds an awful lot like OCD, right? So she, in the book, she's talking about how she lived with her grandparents and her parents and her brothers and sisters. And one night she was lying down and she heard her grandparents talking, and they were like, oh my gosh, I'm really worried about her. She's doing these crazy things that really seem like she has a lot of mental strain. And she definitely has some OCD tendencies. And she was like, what? It's the Holy Ghost. They don't know the Holy Ghost is speaking to me. Hey, voice, are you the Holy Ghost? And the voice says, yes. Which I thought was so funny. Of course, it says yes. I mean, it's you. But anyway, I haven't gotten any farther in the book, but I just thought that was so interesting that the voice in her head at the time when she's 8 years old was the Holy Ghost. And of course, the voice said yes, because it wants to stay there, right? It doesn't want us to become self-aware, especially when we're young, like 8. And it doesn't want us to start to distance ourselves from this voice. So when I was reading about the voice, I read a lot of different ways to start to think about the voice and how to manage the voice. Because for me, and I think for a lot of us, oftentimes the voice is not saying super nice things. It's not walking around saying, you're great. You got this. This is amazing. That speech you're doing is great. What you're doing at work is usually it's more like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you did that. It's so embarrassing. Or, are you sure you want to wear those? I mean, those people are looking at you, like last week when she was talking about the spotlight effect, I feel like the voice is narrating your spotlight. Like, everybody's looking at me. I should be like worried, what are they thinking? So I was looking up at the different ways to manage the voice. Sorry. And I heard the voice discussed as like being another part of us. And you could call it like your mean girl. You could call it your gremlin. One blog called it Drama Joe. Yeah. And he was like, I was hiking with my girlfriend and we were walking down a trail and I looked at this barn and I started thinking about the barn. And then I started thinking about this fire that I remembered. And then I started thinking that this bear was going to attack me. And then I was like, hey, Drama Joe, I don't need this. And so I thought that was pretty cool, like a way to manage his voice when it goes off on crazy tangents. Mickey Singer calls the voice your inner roommate. And he says that it's the true obstacle, it's the main obstacle to realizing your true self, because this voice speaks to you as it is your mind. And mistakenly, you sometimes believe that it really is you, right? And there's nothing more important to true growth than realizing that you are not the voice in the mind. You are the one who hears it. That's what Mickey says. The path towards realizing that voice is not you is personal growth and takes time and practice. Eventually, you will see, as Mickey says, that the real cause of problems is not life itself. It's the commotion your mind makes that really causes the problems. I thought that was very So we have to learn to be okay with what's happening around us. And rather than being allowed to be sucked into the drama and letting that voice create more drama in our head. So why does the mind like to create this drama? Like, why does it want to create more drama rather than letting us be? Because it just creates stress, right? Why does it do that rather than letting us be calm, especially if we're working towards being calmer or listening to that voice? And their theory is that it goes back to the days when we were like cavemen and we really needed to have like that snap decision when if something was going to happen, a threat to us, we need to be able to make that quick decision, be able to look out and know that there's a saber-toothed tiger coming after us, or we have to run. And it's a quick thought without worrying and second guessing ourselves. So that's where like the inner voice maybe comes from, or why it goes down that path of kind of negativity. But how can we move past this voice? And when I'm talking about voice, I'm not talking about just words. If you're one that has thought, feelings or visuals, it's all the same. That's what I'm talking about. The first step is to be aware of the voice, that inner mean girl, that gremlin, and realize it is not actually you. You, big Y, you are the one who is watching. So if we think about this, it's hard to think about. If you're looking in a mirror right now, you look in a mirror and the eyes that are looking at your image in the mirror are you. But think about when you were 5 years old and you looked in the mirror. Was what the person looking through the eyes at the small image of the 5-year-old you, is that you also? That's the big you. It's also called the Atman in yoga, the one who can observe, not just the body, because your body is constantly changing. The Atman is the spiritual life principle of the universe, especially when regarded as inherent in the real self. So the big Y you. So if the voice in your head is not the big Y you, it's part of you. When you realize this, you can kind of start to distance yourself. You can observe the voice. Author Rick Carson calls it a gremlin. And the gremlin is the narrator in your head. He's there with you all the time. He's there when you wake up. He's there when you go to bed. He's there throughout, or she, throughout your entire existence. They tell you what's going on. It interprets everything that's happening to you. And gremlin wants you to accept all the interpretations as reality. Like, this is what's real. But is it? There's always that story that comes up when I think about this, about how we have separate realities in our heads. So say there's a man and a woman, and the man is supposed to come home from work at 5 o'clock and he's not there. And so the woman, his wife, is freaking out. She's like, oh my gosh, where is he? He was supposed to be home at 5. He called and said he was leaving work. He must have gotten in a car accident. Oh, I saw a car accident on TV. That must be him. He's there and he's not calling me. I'm just waiting for the EMT to call. Maybe I should call the hospitals. And it's getting later and later. And she's just over the top, like freaking out, right? And her whole world is just off. And then the man comes home and he's got her flowers and he's got her like cookies or her favorite thing. And he was like, I was thinking about you at work and I went and did this thing and I forgot my phone was dead. And so their realities were completely different, right? The voices in her head went off on this crazy tangent and it made her life terrible for like 3 hours when that's not actually what was really happening. So your thoughts are not actually reality. You will always have thoughts, right? That's a natural state. It's really hard to get rid of thoughts, but you do have choices about the thoughts. Your gremlin will always want you to come back to the negative, the scary thoughts, the bad thoughts. That's just what happens. And I think of it as a rut. So your gremlin has these thoughts and you have, at least I do. There's some thoughts that you just always come back to, especially it tends to be in a little, a pattern. You have a pattern of thoughts and it's kind of like when you're quiet, when you're not doing anything, or when your mind is realizing that you're not focused on something, it's going to find thoughts because it needs to talk to you. And if you're always thinking certain thoughts, those are the thoughts it comes back to because it's easy. It's what you're thinking every day. It's a rut. And the more you think those same thoughts, it digs that rut deeper. And like when you're driving your car and you're in some ruts, it's really hard. If the ruts go right and you want to go left, it's pretty hard to get that car to go left. So if you're having these thoughts and they're always going right, it's not so easy to make them go left. You have to really work at it. You have to try. That's something that I always tell my daughter. She's always calling me up and telling me that she has these thoughts. And it's a lot like the spotlight effect. They're all looking at me. I think they're noticing my zit on my face. I think my hair looks crazy today. I got this bad haircut. I'm going to wear a hat for 2 months. Literally, that's what she's doing. Because she's so focused on like how people are looking at her. And I keep trying to tell her, the more you focus on that, the more you're going to think that, right? You've got to like get your mind to start going in another direction, but that takes intentionality and work. And you have to wanna, right? And so you can use a mantra. That's something that you repeat in your mind. So when you're walking around, instead of just letting your thoughts go constantly off on tracks, you can just walk around and repeat yourself a mantra. Mickey actually said that he did that when he was first learning how to learn to meditate, and realizing that his mind, his thoughts weren't always helping him. So he would walk around literally just saying, God, 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 God. Now that mantra wouldn't work for me. You choose your own. So maybe you say, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough. That one would work for me. I saw a great video on that. But you can choose your own. You make it a habit. And then every time also when you realize that your thoughts are taking you down this crazy train path, that's you just go back. God, 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 or I am enough, I am enough. I used to use this when I was a runner, and I'd be running, training for the marathon. And it was like thousands of miles that I was running. And it was so hard. And you're running and you're like, okay, I can't, like your mind is like, you're tired. You just want to stop. Look, you could turn down this street and you could go home right now. And instead of letting your mind go down that way, I do a mantra like, I can do this. I can, I am, I will, I am strong. And I would just repeat, 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 because that would keep my mind busy off of whatever my body was feeling. Because I know half of that struggle is mind. Your body has been training. So my body really could do it. It was just my mind wants me to stop. I think of this as, being focused. When you're focused on something, and like the mantra, sometimes you don't hear that voice. Like when you're at a movie, when you go to a movie, sometimes you go in the movie and like 2 hours are done in 5 seconds. And that voice wasn't talking to you that whole time because you were really focused. Your other way to do this is to have mindfulness, to be practiced being in the present moment, being right here and right now. So very specifically. So your mind wants you to travel down, ruminate on the past, think about the future, worry about this or that. Really being focused. That's the body scan that we did in meditation is a mindfulness practice. It's practicing feeling your body in the present moment. Another way you can do mindfulness is to just watch the trees outside, looking at the wind. When you're washing dishes, practicing feeling the actual water on your hands, practicing noticing each individual dish. Mindfulness is your basic human ability to be present and aware of what we're doing. It's learning not to be overly reactive and overwhelmed by that around us. Mindfulness is something that we all can do. And it's more easily done when you practice it every day. And whenever you bring awareness to what you're directly experiencing or to your state of mind, you're being mindful. And there's research showing that when you train your mind this way, it actually remodels the physical structure of your brain. So you're kind of digging a new rut, right? There also is research when you practice meditation that you're creating new neurons in your brain for that. Which is a meditation is another way to learn to not listen to your gremlin, because in meditation, when we sit quietly and still and we close our eyes. Now, when we do that and we practice meditation, often we are listening to the voice. In fact, I would say 95% of the time, you're still having that voice in your head, but then there's that maybe 5% of the time where you're not. And that's when you learn, where you're hearing the quietness in your mind. And then that in between time when you're meditating and perhaps you're realizing I'm hearing those thoughts and I need to bring my mind back to my breath or my mantra or whatever it is, that realization is what is going to help you step back from your gremlin and your thoughts. You can use that in everyday life. And the more you practice that in meditation, the more you can bring it into your everyday life. The more you can realize that when I'm outside and I'm doing my animals and it's all muddy and I almost slip and I get all, it doesn't really matter. I'm still out here. It's beautiful outside and whatever happened right now is over. So it's allowing yourself to let go of all the train that your thought wants to take you down. So the only permanent solution to your problems, this is a Mickey Singer quote, is to go inside and to let go of the part of you that seems to have the problems with reality. To attain true inner freedom, you must be able to objectively watch your problems instead of being lost in them. Once you've made that commitment to free yourself of the scared person inside, you will notice that there is a clear point at which your growth takes place. When we are free from the daily distraction of thoughts, we are able to more focus on allowing ourselves to be open and to live without contraction. And so I hope this was a little bit helpful in thinking about thoughts and yeah, that is my talk for today. Thanks, guys.